Study skills is something that is very, very important for every learner to know and understand. When you are preparing for your exams or when you are about to study, you will automatically have some form of anxiety. It is very imperative for you to understand as to what could be the trigger of that anxiety. Like, for example, you need to identify if that anxiety is because of the high expectations that you have set up for yourself. You need to check if maybe you have set the goals that are very unrealistic, that will lead to anxiety. You need to find out as to what is it that you could do best to make you a person who will understand and keep what you have studied in your memory. So it is very much important to identify the triggers of your anxiety. Some of the people's anxiety could be triggered by not having enough time to sleep. So it is very much important that you make it a point that you have enough time to sleep in order to do away with that anxiety. Another thing that could trigger anxiety is the intake of caffeine. So with caffeine, you can get it from a lot of drinks. Some people resort to the taking of coffee. Some resort to the taking of these energy drinks so that they can have energy or not fall asleep when they will be studying. So too much caffeine could trigger your anxiety. Instead of solving that problem that you want to solve, you will be causing a problem. So you must make it a point that you manage the intake of caffeine. The next thing that you need to do after dealing with that anxiety is to try and plan and organize your study. Because if you don't plan and study, that is where you will find yourself having so much confusions. And as a result of that, you will study nothing. So in order for you to be organized, you need to have your work being cut into chunks, smaller chunks, because you cannot expect yourself to study the whole chapter at a go. Just take part by part, topic and by topic, subtopic by subtopic, so that you should be able to understand them well. Because if you want to study everything at a go, that's where you are going to lose it. You are going to forget everything that you have studied. So you must try to make it a point that you have your work cut into chunks. And again, you must schedule your study time. You cannot just decide to study now and decide to stop studying now. You must schedule your time whereby you indicate the time at which you are going to start studying. And for every 45 minutes of study time that you take, you must take a 15 minutes break, because your brains need to rest. You cannot study from morning till sunset or for the whole 2 hours without a break. That is where you are going to have a breakdown. So for you to be able to understand well, take a break after every 45 minutes, a 15 minutes break. And during that break, that's when you can try to revisit what you have studied, or not looking at your notes or looking at your book, by just trying to be a teacher of yourself, trying to teach yourself what you have studied. And then you will be able to identify the gaps that you have in whatever you were studying. Then when you go back to study again, then you will have to look at those things that you have failed to internalize. Don't forget that you have to make studying a habit. You don't have to make it feel like it's a burden or a punishment. Make it fun. You have to enjoy it. Study in a way that will make you feel you are enjoying it. That will be the best thing that you could do, because once you make it feel like it's a punishment, you won't be able to study with all of your heart. And as a result of that, you won't internalize what you are studying. And when it comes to exams or tests, you won't be able to recall that. And that is not what you are studying for. You are studying so that you can internalize the knowledge that you are getting from what you are studying.
One of my favorite quotes is, "The difference between try and triumph is just a little umph." So first of all, we need to think about setting the scene when you study. If you think about the scene, it is where you are studying. If you have noisy siblings or pets that's distracting, you need to remove them from your area and try and isolate yourself as much as you can to really be quiet when you study. So when we speak about noise and having some quiet time, we also need to, of course, address music. So I understand that it's fun to listen to your raps and your raves, but that's not typically the music that you need to listen to when you're studying. So when we study, we would like you to listen to study meditation music or classical music to get your brain to activate the beta waves to optimize your learning opportunity. When we think about studying, we need to be comfortable, but not too comfortable. If we are too comfortable, we might become lazy. So studying on your bed is definitely not advised. The perfect learning environment should be at your table with a chair. We should think about the lighting. If your lighting is dim, and if you study with a heater or an aircon, you might feel a bit drowsy because your brain will start making melatonin, and that makes you sleepy. So we should have good bright light, fresh air flowing in to really optimize your learning opportunity. Thinking about your desk, it needs to be organized. If your desk is organized, your learning will be organized, and vice versa. So we need to have all your markers, your pencils, your books, your notes, your scrap paper, everything ready to optimize your learning. At this time of your life, you know exactly who you are and how you study. So use this to your advantage. If you are a morning person, set your alarm. Wake up early and start studying. If you are a night owl, use the time to your advantage. The key here is to not procrastinate, to use your time effectively, and if you have any time during the day, use it wisely. It's important to understand the way that you study as well. If you are a visual student, it's important to make your learning visual. So stick pages on your cupboard, teach to your imaginary class, or bring in those noisy siblings and let them sit in your lesson, and you are the teacher. Also, we need to remember that if I say a word like parrot, what do you think of immediately? You think about the parrot, the colorful birds, red and oranges and yellows and blues. You don't see the word parrot, you see the image. So that is what your brain thinks like. So if we study and we are visual learners, we should study with colors, with pictures. We should make it very interesting because it will optimize the way that our brain retains the information and also stores it in long-term memory. Lastly, if you are a busy learner, not wanting to completely sit still all the time, then fidget. Buy yourself a fidget toy or even make one. Play with some press stick, fill a balloon with some flour, sit on a gym ball, walk around when studying. Use movement to your advantage. As the first part of your study skills, it's important to focus on note-taking and summarizing. If you do take notes, you need to underline your keywords, your headings, and the most important information. Take that information and then summarize it. We cannot do this the day before our exams. We need to at least have these notes ready 2 weeks prior. It is important to have your summaries ready, compiled at least 2 weeks before your exam. And remember, you have to revise.
How does one mentally prepare themselves? in order to study and memorize information. It's very important to select whatever you would like to study initially, and then move on to new information by using associated information that you know of. And then lastly, also try to recite. Importantly to note that you could use videos as well as think about movies that could probably assist you in moving forward. Think about the type of learner that you are. It will depend. If you're a visual learner, you will prefer to use mind maps, cartoons, and sometimes drawings and labeling. Whereas if you are an auditory learner, you would much prefer using rhymes, jingling, and you would prefer then word associations. Important to note that one could also use acronyms in order to gain insight. For example, if one had to use the word RICE, it could stand for to initially rest, ice, compression, and elevate, which ultimately helps for a person who is injured. We could also use groups of information and place them together in order to assist. Another way of maximizing your potential is always to remember to seek support. How do we do this? If you are feeling very anxious and there's anxiety about a class, a subject, it is important for you to always seek and approach your teachers, counselors, or even your peers in order to assist you, to give you maximum support. How does one procrastinate productively? There are two types of procrastination. We have a passive and an active procrastination. I would like to cite two examples in order to explain to you the difference in order to ensure that you maximize your time effectively. For example, let's say you had a maths example that you are struggling with. Initially, one would think that let me go outside, and this is something which would be considered as a negative thing to do. So for 15 minutes you say that you would like to go outside, but you rather spend 5 hours forgetting about the problem sum that you initially had to do. Whereas when you do it in an active procrastination, it can be considered a positive thing, where you consciously decide that for the first 10 to 15 minutes, I would spend time outside. But you remember to come back to deal with the issue of the problem solving. So it's important. One can procrastinate, but in delaying that, we can then find a substitute of our priorities and then go back to it. And this is integral. Otherwise, we would find ourselves procrastinating all the time and not fitting within our goals.